The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the comfortable, settled silence of a home at rest, but a hollow, echoing silence that felt wrong. The hum of the refrigerator was gone. The rhythmic ticking of my father's grandfather clock in the hall, missing. If you want to know how this all ends, subscribe, because the journey from this empty room to getting my life back is one you won't want to miss. I'd been gone for the weekend, a rare trip to the coast with my sister, Jean. It was my son Mark's idea. "You deserve a break, Mom," he'd said on the phone, his voice smoother than usual. "Tiffany and I will keep an eye on the place. Don't you worry about a thing." I should have known then. His wife, Tiffany, never did anything out of kindness unless there was something in it for her. I walked from the foyer into the living room, my small suitcase bumping against my leg. The space where my sofa had been for 20 years was now just a rectangle of lighter-colored carpet. The end tables, the lamps my late husband, Tom, had picked out, the curio cabinet with my glass bird collection, all gone. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Panic began to claw at my throat. I ran to the kitchen. The refrigerator, my new dishwasher, the microwave, gone. Empty spaces and disconnected water lines stared back at me. They had even taken the kitchen table. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my cell phone. I called Mark. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice breezy. "Hey, Mom. How was the beach?" "Mark, what happened?" "My house, it's empty. I've been robbed." There was a pause. I heard Tiffany's muffled voice in the background, sharp and impatient. Then Mark sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "Mom, relax. We didn't rob you. We just moved a few things." "Moved things?" "Moved all of my furniture and appliances." "Mark, the grandfather clock is gone." "My father's clock." "Look, Tiffany and I talked about it. You're getting older, and that house is just too much for you. You'll probably be moving into a managed care facility in the next few years anyway. We were just getting a head start on downsizing for you. Think of it as pre-sorting your inheritance." I sank down onto the bare kitchen floor, the cold tiles seeping through my slacks. The casual cruelty of his words stole my breath. Pre-sorting my inheritance. As if I were already gone. As if my life, my home, my memories were just inventory to be divided up. "You had no right," I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it felt like ice in my veins. "We're your only family, Mom." "Who else has the right?" he said, his tone turning defensive. "It's better this way. The furniture looks great in our new house, by the way. You should see it. Tiff is really happy." I heard her murmur something approvingly. He was parroting her. He had to be. My son, the boy I'd raised to be kind and considerate, was gone. "Bring it back, Mark," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Bring it all back now." "We can't do that, Mom. We hired a moving company. It's all settled. We'll talk about this later. Gotta go." And he hung up. I sat there in the silence, on the floor of my plundered home. For an hour, maybe two, I just let the shock wash over me. They thought I was a frail old woman they could just erase. They thought I would cry and complain and eventually give up because that's what old ladies do. They had underestimated me. Tom always said my greatest strength wasn't my kindness, but my meticulous nature. I kept records. I kept receipts. I kept everything. And as I slowly stood up, my knees cracking in protest, I realized that my son and his wife had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. A crucial detail they had forgotten about was tucked away in my home office safe, and it was the key to everything. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to the police. A young, patient officer named Miller came to the house. He walked through the empty rooms, his expression a mixture of professional calm and personal sympathy. He took my statement, documenting everything I could remember. "Ma'am, I understand this is devastating," he said gently, closing his notebook. "But because your son has admitted to taking the items, this moves out of the realm of felony theft and into what we call a civil dispute. A family matter. We will file a report, and that will be your primary evidence, but the criminal court is unlikely to pursue charges. So he can just take my entire life's possessions, and it's a family matter? Legally, your path is through the civil courts. You'll need to sue for the return of your property or its value." He handed me a card with a case number on it. I'm sorry. I truly am. After he left, the true scope of the violation hit me. They had even taken my bed. And the washer and dryer Tom had bought me for our 25th anniversary. They hadn't just taken things, they'd taken my memories, my comfort, my independence. I spent the night on an old air mattress I found in the garage, wrapped in a musty sleeping bag. In the dark, the house creaked and groaned, its familiar sounds now alien and mournful. The next morning, I made coffee on a camp stove and sat on a cardboard box. This was not a family matter. This was a hostile takeover. They hadn't just pre-sorted my inheritance, they had stolen my present. And I was going to get it back. I started where Tom would have, with documentation. I went to the small home office, which they had thankfully ignored, probably because it only contained a desk and filing cabinets. I pulled out my files. For every major purchase, I had a receipt. The new Kenmore washer and dryer set from 2 years ago? Receipt stapled to the warranty booklet, complete with serial numbers. The Lazy Boy recliner Tom loved? I had the original sales invoice from 1998. One by one, I pulled them out, creating a mountain of paper that represented decades of building a home. Then I dug deeper. I found photo albums. There was the dining room table, set for Christmas 2019, with Mark and Tiffany smiling right at the camera. There was the grandfather clock in the background of a photo from my grandson's first birthday party. There was the curio cabinet, gleaming in the light from the window, in a picture of me holding my cat, Jasper. I wasn't just building a list of items, I was building a story of ownership, a visual timeline that proved these things were mine, in my home, for years. Then I remembered their house. They'd bought it 3 years ago, a sprawling place in a new development they couldn't possibly afford on their own. I had wanted to see my son settled, to give my grandson the stability I'd had. So I helped. Generously. And like everything else in my life, I documented it. I went in my small safe and pulled out a folder labeled Mark, House. Inside was the evidence of their biggest vulnerability, a piece of paper they were so sure I would have forgotten about. A contract for a personal loan I had given them for their down payment. $50,000. It was all spelled out, terms, repayment schedule, and a default clause. And looking at their signatures next to mine, I knew what I had to do next. You won't believe how that simple piece of paper became my most powerful weapon. My next stop was an appointment with a lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies that my sister recommended. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his late 60s who listened to my story without interruption, his face impassive. I laid out the police report, the stack of receipts, the photographs, and finally, the loan document. When I finished, he picked up the loan agreement. He read it, then read it again. A slow smile spread across his face. "Mrs. Gable," he said, looking at me with newfound respect. "This isn't just a list of your stolen possessions. This is leverage. They didn't just empty your house. They breached a contract, and they have fundamentally misunderstood who they are dealing with." Mr. Davies explained the plan. First, we would send a formal demand letter. It would list every single item, its estimated value, and demand its immediate return in the same condition it was taken. It would also formally call in the entire balance of the $50,000 loan, citing the default clause which was triggered by their act of bad faith. An act of bad faith is a bit of a gray area, but taking everything you own after you gave them this money? "I think a judge will see our side of it," he explained. "They will have 30 days to comply. If they do not, we file a suit for replevin, that's the legal term for recovering personal property, and for the loan repayment." The letter was sent via certified mail. I imagined Tiffany seeing the envelope from a law firm, laughing it off, thinking it was a bluff. I imagined her telling Mark I was just being dramatic. For 2 weeks, there was nothing but that hollow silence in my house and in my life. I borrowed a card table and chairs from my neighbor, Joan, who had been horrified to learn what happened. She brought me casseroles and sat with me in the empty living room, her presence a small beacon of warmth. Then an envelope arrived. Not from a lawyer, but a personal letter from Tiffany, written on a cutesy floral stationery. It wasn't an apology. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. "Carol," it began, "not even Mom. We received your lawyer's very aggressive letter. I'm so sorry to see you're this upset and confused. Mark and I were only trying to help you. The doctor did say at your last checkup that your memory was starting to slip a bit, remember? Perhaps you've forgotten our conversations about downsizing. All of your things are perfectly safe with us. We are taking excellent care of your legacy. As for the loan, it's frankly insulting that you would bring that up. That was a gift, and you know it. We hope you get the help you need and come to your senses soon. Every word was designed to wound, to make me doubt myself, to paint me as a confused old woman. But she had made a fatal error. She had put it in writing. Her admission that they had my property and her false claim about the loan were now exhibits A and B. I called Mr. Davies and read him the letter. I could practically hear him rubbing his hands together over the phone. She's arrogant, Mrs. Gable, he said. And arrogance makes people sloppy. They think they hold all the cards. It's time to show them what a losing hand they're actually playing. He paused, then added, while we're at it, let's pull the property records for their home. There's one more detail I want to be absolutely certain about. And that detail would prove to be the final nail in their coffin. The property record search that Mr. Davies initiated came back within a day. As he suspected, there was one more piece to the puzzle, one more act of generosity that Mark and Tiffany had twisted into an opportunity. To secure their mortgage at a better rate, the bank had required a cosigner due to Mark's unsteady employment history at the time. I had co-signed their mortgage. It wasn't just my $50,000 in their down payment. My name and my good credit were intertwined with the very roof over their heads. If they defaulted, or if any legal judgment was placed against them that threatened their financial stability, the bank could look to me. This gave me significant legal standing. Armed with this new information, Mr. Davies filed the lawsuit. Mark and Tiffany were formally served. Their arrogance finally buckled, and they hired a lawyer of their own. The process was slow, a grinding machine of motions and paperwork. Their lawyer tried to argue that the furniture and appliances were gifts, a transition of property in anticipation of my inevitable decline. He argued that the $50,000 was a familial gift as well, with no expectation of repayment. This is where my meticulous records became their worst nightmare. We produced receipts for every major item, some dating back decades. We had the photos, irrefutable proof of the items inside my home just before I left for my break. We had the testimony of my neighbor, Joan, who saw the moving van and could attest that I had never spoken of moving or downsizing. The deposition was the turning point. We all sat in a sterile conference room, me and Mr. Davies on one side, Mark, Tiffany, and their flustered-looking lawyer on the other. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his hands, looking like a boy caught with a cookie. Tiffany, however, was defiant. She sat straight-backed, her chin held high, ready for battle. Mr. Davies was brilliant. He was calm, methodical, and relentless. He first established the timeline. So, Tiffany, you believed my client was planning to move into a care facility? Yes. She's forgetful. She was having trouble keeping up the big house, Tiffany said smoothly. And you decided to, as you said in your letter, pre-sort her inheritance, without her knowledge or consent while she was away on a trip you encouraged her to take? We were helping. I see. Mr. Davies slid a photo across the table. It was the picture of their dining room from my photo album, with them sitting at the table I'd inherited from my mother. This is your dining room, correct? Taken last Thanksgiving at my client's home. Tiffany glanced at it. Yes. And this one? He slid over another photo, this one from a real estate listing. It showed a professionally staged dining room. It was their new house. And in it sat my dining room table, my chairs, my china cabinet against the wall. This is your current home? Her lawyer coughed. Tiffany's joy tightened. Yes. Mr. Davies continued, calmly producing item after item. A receipt for the Kenmore appliances with my name and address on it. A copy of the canceled check I wrote for the grandfather clock's maintenance just 6 months prior. And then he brought out the big guns. He placed the signed loan agreement on the table. Is this your signature, Mark? Mark flinched and nodded mutely. And yours, Tiffany? She glared but nodded. It clearly states this is a loan with repayment terms. At what point did this loan transform into a gift? It was always a gift. Tiffany snapped. It was understood. An unwritten understanding that directly contradicts a legally signed document? Mr. Davies raised an eyebrow. And when you chose to empty your benefactor's home of all her possessions, did you believe that action would strengthen your claim that this was all done in good faith? The room was silent. Mark was visibly pale. Their lawyer was scribbling furiously on his notepad. Finally, Mr. Davies slid one last document across the table. It was the mortgage agreement for their house, with my signature clearly visible in the cosigner section. As you know, Mr. Davies said, his voice dropping slightly, my client is financially tied to your largest asset. We have an appraisal for her stolen property totaling over $70,000. We have a legal claim for the $50,000 loan. That is a judgment of $120,000. If you were to have a judgment like that against you, it would constitute a massive risk to the lender. And a massive risk to my client, who is on the hook for your mortgage if you default. We are prepared to take this to a judge. I suspect he will not only grant us the judgment, but may also have some choice words about your definition of helping. Tiffany's mask of defiance finally cracked. For the first time, she looked scared. She looked at her husband, who was wilting in his chair. She looked at her lawyer, who simply shook his head, a clear signal that they were beaten. They had leveraged my love and trust against me, and now my prudence and foresight were being leveraged against them. The beautiful new house, the foundation of their entire smug lifestyle, was built on a foundation of my money, my credit, and my kindness. And it was all about to come crashing down. Their lawyer asked for a recess. Mark and Tiffany followed him into the hallway. I couldn't hear their words, but the tone was clear, a hushed, frantic argument. When they returned 20 minutes later, their faces were grim. My clients are prepared to settle, their lawyer said, avoiding eye contact. The terms were non-negotiable. 1. The full and immediate return of every single item of my property to be moved back into my house at their expense by a professional moving company of my choosing. 2. An immediate payment via cashier's check for the full loan amount of $50,000 plus my legal fees. A week later, a moving truck pulled into my driveway. Not the same shabby one they had used before, but a reputable, professional company that I had selected. I stood at the door with a checklist, directing the movers as they carefully brought each piece back to its rightful place. My sofa. The curio cabinet. My father's grandfather clock was gently placed in the hall, and its familiar ticking once again filled the silence. As they set up my bed, I felt a wave of relief so powerful my knees went weak. The last item off the truck was a small box. Inside were all the little things, including my glass bird collection, miraculously unbroken. As the movers left, my son lingered at the doorway. He looked smaller, diminished. Mom. He started, his voice cracking. I am so sorry. I looked at him, and for a moment, I saw the boy I raised. But it was fleeting. I saw the man who had stood by and let his wife orchestrate the cruel dismantling of my life, the man who had called it pre-sorting my inheritance. I know you are, Mark, I said quietly. You're sorry you got caught. I closed the door. I walked through my house, touching the familiar surfaces of my furniture. It was all back. I was whole again. The check for $56,000, loan plus legal fees, was sitting on the kitchen counter, which was once again occupied by my table and chairs. The next day, I had a locksmith come and change all the locks. I blocked their numbers from my phone. The quiet that settled over the house that evening was different. It wasn't the hollow, empty silence of loss. It was the peaceful, satisfying sound of justice. It was the sound of a new beginning.
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.